At the conference, AIDS 2014, and I've got James Welsby here with me, who is the dancer and choreographer of the amazing performance of HEX, which we've just shot that under the really appalling circumstances of the stage in the Global Village. I saw it the other night in the theatre, where it was truly astonishing, and it's a piece that he's written, and he can tell you about that. So this is James Welsby. I've seen it now twice, and I'm really thrilled with what you've done. It's very moving, and it's beautiful, and it's exhilarating. And my first question is just why?
I started working on HEX 2 years ago, and I guess I was becoming aware of my lack of knowledge of AIDS history. As a gay person, I feel like it's something I should know about, but because you don't inherently interact with other queer people outside your own generation, because of the way our community is structured, you sort of have to seek out that history yourself. It's not like there's a gay school that you go to. So I realized there were gaps in my knowledge of my own community's history, and a few films had come out, like How to Survive a Plague and We Were Here, and more recently United in Anger. And those archival documentary films came out around the same time when a lot of people in my peer group, mid-20s, started being notified that they were HIV positive. And so it really felt like safe sex was out. Like no one gave a shit about condoms. Like it just kind of left the consciousness of my generation to a degree, not entirely, but it's that sort of that cycle of consciousness. I think I've heard it referred to as AIDS amnesia. So I guess from a choreographic point of view, I was intimidated because I'm a choreographer. I address work physically and in terms of bodies and structure, and the movement of the body is my primary medium rather than using text. So it was intimidating to try to think, how do I approach this, and is it even appropriate to approach this in dance? Should it be only spoken word? Should it be film? But then I kind of thought, well, this issue is primarily about bodies and how our bodies change, how our bodies react to things, how our bodies interact with each other. So I realized it was appropriate to make a dance work about HIV and AIDS history. And then it kind of really came to me that I wanted to use the dance vocabularies from clubs that were prevalent in the kind of arc of the early years of the crisis before antiretrovirals were available in Australia and in the US. And those are, my mother's American, my father's Australian. I grew up in America and Australia, so that's my dual citizenship. And those are the countries I'm focusing on. So I wanted to look at the 70s a little bit and disco. I wanted to look at the 80s and MTV and 80s jazz, and then look at the 90s, looking at voguing and rave, to kind of map the period just before the epidemic began, and then the early years of the epidemic right through to circa 1996 when antiretrovirals became available. So this piece is not really documenting anything. It's not grounded enough in facts, because it's dance, it's abstract, it speaks in allegories rather than in specific characters and dates and narrative. It's kind of more impressionistic. So it's really, more than anything else, it's a reflection on intergenerational relationships. So I'm interested in this concept of the every when. I've always been so fascinated by the idea of meeting my dad at 26. I'm 26. I want to meet my dad at 26. I want to meet my granddad at 26. I want us all to be like, hi. And of course this is impossible, but it's not spiritually impossible. And that's my familial lineage, but my cultural lineage is really queer. And so I do see people who are my my biological parents who are queer, who are the same age, I see them as my cultural parents, and we have a lineage as well. What unites us is desire and potentially social discrimination. There's a lot of things that unite the queer community, but it's not genetic. And so I'm looking at the things that we have in common, and the structural content of the narrative of our generations that are different, and blurring the lines there. So I really, in HEX, I wanted to make a work that was both contemporary and retrospective. It's not pure nostalgia. It's not a reenactment. It's a contemporary meditation on what AIDS activist history means to the generation today, regardless of whether you're HIV positive or not HIV positive, because my generation is living in a profoundly more privileged time because we don't know our peers dying in numbers. So I feel really, really compelled to honour my queer history and to question, is this history really my generation's, or is the history of each generation separate? So that's the question I'm asking. With the founding of ACT UP in 1987, that's the year I was born. It's also the year that the Grim Reaper campaign ran on Australian television, the public service announcement. So if there's symbolism there for me, because my generation's never known a world without HIV. It's always been a reality, but when we kind of became old enough to be adults, it seemed to have kind of slipped away from a major sense of consciousness or urgency. So that's what I'm looking at, kind of cycles of time, rather than what HIV means in real terms today, in terms of health or stigma. It's not really about...
So the thing that I want to ask now is what happens to it now? Where does it go from here?
Well, I don't know. I've made a handful of feature-length works, but they haven't toured very much. It's very hard to convince producers and festival circuits to kind of invest in a young and emerging choreographer.
And there's no money in it at all, is there?
I'll tell you something. I applied for government funding 5 times in a row to fund my show at the Malthouse. We got rejected every time because there were doubts about whether the subject was being treated with enough care, whether I was old enough to address such a serious topic publicly, and I every time I would kind of very respectfully ask the panel, or ask the arts officer I was speaking with. I would say, well, excuse me, but is anyone on the panel from the queer community? And often they would say no. And then I'd say, is anyone on the panel from the HIV positive community? And they'd always say no. And I'd say, well, this project is coming from the HIV positive community, and it's supported by Victorian AIDS Council. So that's kind of, that should really be enough integrity to endorse its support. But it's been a struggle, and it's hard to get companies as well to sponsor a show about HIV and AIDS because there's so much stigma out there still, and there's so much fear, like even in theatre, let alone in a hospital. So I would like the show to go on tour. I don't really see myself as an activist at all. I see myself as an artist, and I see this show, I use this term in my own way, but it's like a spiritual thing about connecting with the queer generations before me, and that's who I want to connect with. But yeah, I'm so happy with the show, and I'm so proud of its success and who it's reached so far. That's really what I wanted. So I hope we can take it to places. I'd really love to take it to New York one day. But hopefully it can keep living in Australia, America, and beyond. But I don't know. Maybe people will get sick of it. maybe they'll be like, go away.
Maybe you get tired of showing people your ass.
Never. No. I set out to show everyone in Melbourne my arsehole, and I'm doing pretty well.
They seem to enjoy it. Look, the show had a great deal of emotional gravity for me. I thought you had emotional and intellectual intelligence to bring it off. And it really surprised me. And the thing that was most beautiful was that there's this very beautiful young man on stage doing it, and it's like way above your years. And
I don't know about that.
no, it was. And you do know it because you've got fantastic reviews to back it up. They've been
One bad one.
Oh, yeah.
One bad one, but most of them, and I, as a queer person, I applaud dissent. So, the great reviews have been wonderful,
Yeah.
and more than anything, the most meaningful feedback has been from some young people from Living Positive Victoria who wrote responses to the show. So they wrote their own reviews and they put them online for everyone to see, and their feedback was the most meaningful to me.
James, thanks. That is fantastic, and from us, the two of us, and everyone else who's seen it, I hope it goes really well.
Thank you. I hope some more people can see it and keep responding to it, because that's really great. And I really like hearing responses and not responding to responses, because I feel like just starting conversations is really just the best.